When I first built this PC behind me about 3 years ago, some people asked me why I installed a Gen 3 M2 SSD when the motherboard could handle a Gen 4 M2 SSD. Well, my answer at the time was that I bought everything on sale and they were just too expensive at the time for me to use. Now they've gotten a bit cheaper, so I've gone out and bought a Gen 4 M2 SSD drive, the Corsair MP600 Pro. So without further ado, let's crank this bad boy open and get the new drive installed.
So the first thing I'm going to do is create a Windows boot drive so I can reinstall Windows 11 once I've installed the new SSD. To do that, I need to go to the Windows 11 install page to download the Windows 11 ISO. Then I need a USB drive that's 8 GB or larger. Here I have one that is 16 GB. Now I'll need a piece of software called Rufus. Select the Windows 11 ISO I downloaded earlier, then the USB drive I've inserted, and let it do its thing. After it's finished, I'll eject the drive and put it aside for later. Now I'll say the most obvious thing in the world yet again, and that is to turn off your computer. Because you don't want to be removing a critical component such as a hard drive while your PC is turned on, especially if it has your operating system installed. Next, in order to remove the Gen 3 SSD I already have installed, I have to remove the heatsink that covers it. Your motherboard might not come with its own heatsink, in which case you won't have to do this. Once the heatsink is out of the way, I can finally get to my old SSD. All I need to do to remove it is unscrew the single tiny little screw at one end of the SSD and pull it out from the little slot at the other end. I didn't even have to wiggle it to get it to come out. Now let's take a look at the new drive. You can see it already has a heatsink installed, so rather than reinstall the old one that came with the motherboard, I'm just going to use the one that's already on it. All I needed to do is match up the notch on the side of the SSD to the slot on the motherboard, slide it into place and screw it in. I'm going to insert the USB boot drive I created earlier. Then, after powering the computer back up, enter the BIOS by pressing the corresponding buttons at boot. Once I'm in, I just need to go to my boot options and select the USB boot drive I created earlier to boot up first. You'll notice there is already a Windows Boot Manager in the list because I reinstalled my old SSD that already has Windows installed in the second Gen 3 M2 slot at the back of my motherboard. But I don't want to boot from that drive, so I'm going to select the USB stick and reinstall Windows onto my new Corsair SSD. Okay, time to restart and see if it's detected. And it worked! Unfortunately, I conveniently forgot to film the install process. So just follow the on-screen prompts, and if all goes well, it should boot into Windows. And it did! Once you're in Windows, you can check and see if your SSD is working correctly by using free software such as Crystal Disk Info and Crystal Disk Benchmark. For example, I can see that my new drive is running at exactly the speed it is supposed to be running at, so everything is working as it should.
Well, there you have it. My brand new Corsair MP600 Pro M2 Gen 4 SSD drive is installed and ready to go. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Otherwise, like and subscribe because it does help this channel grow. Otherwise, I'll catch you later.